to give you a sense of how the Perot Committee is putting on this campaign in the final 4 weeks of this presidential election.
Tonight, Ross Perot, plain talk about jobs, debt, and the Washington mess.
Good evening. We've talked a lot about the importance of having the American people fully informed so that they can make intelligent decisions as owners of this country. In effect, this is our first town hall. I thought it would be a good idea to take the most important problem first. That problem is our economy and jobs. These factors determine how we live and how our children will live. We live in the greatest country in the history of man. The American people are good. And yet, over time, we have created a government that's a mess. We have a situation where the president blames Congress, Congress blames the president, Democrats and Republicans blame one another. Nobody steps up to the plate and accepts responsibility for anything, including the $4 trillion debt that you and I must pay for. They don't talk about the fact that we're the most violent, crime-ridden society in the industrialized world, that we have the least effective school system in the industrialized world. They certainly don't talk about the fact that we're shipping entire industries overseas and destroying millions of jobs, but we'll talk about that tonight. Now, I can't compete with some of these other entertainment shows, but please stay with me on this program tonight because we're going to go down in the trenches and talk about your jobs and talk about why our country is in decline. We used to have the world's greatest economic engine. We let it slip away, and with it went millions of jobs and taxpayers. Let's take a little time and figure out what happened to the engine. Let's raise the hood and go to work. Let's diagnose the problem. I can tell you before we look at the engine, an engine tune-up won't fix it. We're going to have to do a major overhaul. Here's the picture on our country's debt. Look at how it's grown over the years. We're now up to $4 trillion in debt. That is a staggering load for our country. To help you understand how fast this debt has grown and when it grew, the green is the debt we had in 1980. The red is the debt that has been incurred in the last 12 years. We've had an enormous growth in debt, and we don't have anything to show for it. Okay, here's another headache. It's like the guy that went into the hospital, thought he had a sore arm, found out he had gangrene. But here we are. We're tough people. We can handle it. Look right here at the red. 70% of that $4 trillion debt is due and payable in the next 5 years. Folks in Washington financed long-term problems, short-term, to keep the interest rates down. That's suicide in business. That's suicide in your personal life. That's suicide in your government. If the Japanese, the Germans, and the Arabs, and all these folks that buy our treasury bills ever lose confidence in the United States of America or the U.S. dollar, we're in deep trouble here. Or to use Washington terminology, we're in deep voodoo, folks, right here. Well, what about just this year? How much debt did we pile up this year? This one really bothers me because in order to do this, they have to really assume we are major dumb. For example, it looks like here there's $341 billion. It's actually $400 billion, but they're going to delay appropriating the $60 billion more for the savings and loan bailout until after the election. Well, everybody in America just heard it. You got the $60 billion surprise coming up at the end of the year. If you go back to 1988, right after the election, they dropped the savings and loan mess on you then. Well, it's a repeat act. You cannot run up this kind of debt. Why was this debt run up this year like this? It was run up to make you feel good during an election year. And all these folks in Washington are basically saying to you and me, can we buy your vote with what used to be your money this year? We're not that dumb. But I think it's very important that every American, when you go to the polls, understand that's the game they're trying to play, and it's a game that's costing you big-time money. To help put it in plain language, everybody west of the Mississippi that sends income taxes into the Internal Revenue Service, their taxes are used just to pay interest on the federal debt. They don't buy anything for you. They don't buy anything for your children. They don't do anything to build roads, bridges, better schools, make the streets safe. Pay interest on the debt. We've got to cut it out. Now, let's look at the growth of federal spending and see if there's a trend here. Go all the way back here to 1950. There's obviously a trend here. We've gone up to 25% of our gross national product. That's excessive. But hold on to your hat. If you and I don't take action now as owners of this country, the forecast shows that by the year 2020, federal spending will be 41% of the gross national product. We can't take 25%. We certainly can't take 41%. This is kind of like having Willie Sutton in charge of the bank, folks. He was a famous bank robber, and they asked him, why do you rob banks? And Willie said, because that's where the money is. Well, our bank is being looted big time, and we'll get down to how in a little bit. Well, everybody in Washington, if you'll remember, they didn't know there was a recession. I have a theory about that. See, you remember when Marie Antoinette in the French Revolution said, let them eat cake? My theory has always been, she probably thought they had cake. Now, if you had all the perks and privileges the people we send to Washington as our servants, and we need to get rid of most of those, so they get their heads straight about who's working for who. See, you don't have an indoor tennis court. You don't have a special parking place at the airport. You don't have a special barber waiting for you to cut your hair, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is silly, the things we've allowed to creep in, but it causes them to lose touch with us. And after all, we own the bank. This is our bank, but we got some trouble with the tellers and the loan officers. Now, they didn't know there was a recession, and they kept saying there's not one. Then they said we're coming out of it. Now, let's look at a pattern here. This is interesting. These are all different recessions at different times. And here's the one we're in right now. Look at the consumer spending. Up, 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 up. Oops. Now then, let's go to the industrial production. The factories are pumping again. Right? Way back here, the factories are doing big time. Here, the factory's doing fine. It's doing fine here. It's doing fine here. Oops. Factories are just barely pumping. And here's the one that really sends a signal. The blue is payroll employment. See, here it's coming up, here it's coming up, here it's coming up, here it's coming up, and here you can barely see it. Now, are they out of touch? I believe they are. You're not out of touch, you're hurting. As I say these words, I think of the meat packer out in Iowa I read about on the front page of the New York Times. There was a good man, middle-aged man, who said, I didn't quit my job quit me. The meat packing plant closed. He was a proud man. He had never taken anything from anybody, and he had to go on welfare, and it broke his heart. The other night, my wonderful wife came to bed crying, and I said, what's the matter? And she said, I was just watching television about a steel worker in Pittsburgh who now who lost his job because the steel plant closed, who now has a minimum wage job, who cannot even afford a safety inspection sticker for his car. His wife is ill, and he needs to have transportation. And it just broke her heart because here was a proud, good man who was caught up in a hurricane that he couldn't do anything about. Now that's where we are, folks. You know it. We must have a two-way town hall so that the minute you hurt, the people in Washington know you hurt. And we get out of this let them eat cake routine. Now, let's look at average annual gross national product growth from Eisenhower all the way through to President Bush. This is Eisenhower, this is John Kennedy, this is Lyndon Johnson, Nixon, Ford, Carter, Reagan, and Bush. You can see a historic pattern here, and for some reason we've fallen off the edge of the cliff. Well, I'll tell you one of the reasons we fell off the edge of the cliff. We got into trickle-down economics, and it didn't trickle. Now, if a company's making money, it can spend money on new plants, new equipment, and create new jobs, spend money on research and development. Now, this goes all the way back to 1971. Look how it spiked up here, and look what's happening here. It's just drifting down around here. Corporate profits are down. We need strong, healthy, profitable companies. Why are they down? We're getting our heads kicked in by international competitors. I had a fellow stop me one day and say, Ross, we used to have the biggest banks in the world. How come the biggest banks in the world are in Japan now? I said, well, it's pretty simple. They made better products than we did. We bought their products with what used to be our money. What used to be our money is now in their banks. And what used to be their products is now in our homes, getting less valuable every day. But what used to be our money is now in their banks, getting more valuable every day. That's pretty simple, folks. Y'all understand sports? You got to be the best. We are the best. We can be the best. But we're losing right now. We've got to throw that switch and have a growing, expanding job base and have the world look on us with absolute envy in terms of our ability to create and produce things. You say, well, can't we ship manufacturing overseas and just go to a service economy? Yeah, we did that for the last 12 years. Most of the jobs we created in the last 12 years are minimum wage jobs. They just don't support a family. They just don't support our country. We've got to go back to building and making things. In the words of a man from Japan who really sees us as a friend, he says, in Japan we make things. In the United States, you just play with money. Now let's go back to the late 80s. You had the savings and loan mess. You had the banking problems. You had the junk bond mess. He's right. We were just like little boys playing with money. Did our government step in and stop it? No. Did anybody try to stop it? No. It was the bonfire of the vanities. It was the predator's ball time. Guess who picks up the tab? You say, well, 2 or 3 of them went to jail. Yeah, sure, but I'm sure there are days you'd rather almost be in jail than be paying the bills for what these boys did. That's what's killed us. Well, everybody says things are getting better, so let's start in 1989. We lost 111,000 jobs. 1990, we lost 316,000 jobs. 1991, we lost 556,000 jobs. In 1992, when everybody assured us things were going to turn around and get better, so far we've lost 700,000 jobs. You get a feeling that folks up in Washington don't know what's going on? Okay, you want to be the greatest? You want to be the best? You got to get rid of this chart. At the city, county, state, and federal level, we got more people working in government than we have working in manufacturing. And if we want to be a great country, we have to be a manufacturing superpower. No ifs, ands, buts, no place to run, no place to hide. We can't be a country where 19 out of 20 integrated circuits used in America come from Japan. Well, in all of this, what's happened to the average hourly wage? Well, you don't have to have a PhD from Harvard in economics to figure that out based on what I've already told you. Here it is, 1951 to 60. It's going up, up, up. Get to 1980, now it's going down. Supply and demand. Not much work, a lot of people looking for work. Good jobs gone all over the world. Service economy jobs, minimum wage jobs, stay right here at home. For your children and for yourself. These are the industries of the future. Every country in the world is zeroed in on making sure that they dominate these industries. All of our international economic competitors are totally committing to dominating these industries. We don't even have a plan. These are the high-paying jobs for the future. Biotech, telecommunications, civilian aviation, computer software, and robotics. We don't have a plan or a strategy. We better get one. That's 21st century capitalism. They all do, we don't. So, but Ross, we'll always make the commercial airliners for the world. Don't bet on it. Well, the net of all this, here's what's happened to your dollar. In 1950, when a dollar was worth $1, it is now worth 18 cents. As I talk about it, think about the 18 to 24-year-olds. Up to 40% of them make less than $12,000. See? Their dollar is decreasing in value. It's not how many dollars you make, it's how much your dollar will buy. And I'm going to tell you the core cause of the problem. And if you haven't listened to anything else I've said tonight, listen very carefully to this. Because this is coming to Washington to cash in and then go get a several $100,000 a year job as a foreign lobbyist and use your influence in the White House and Congress to ship not only jobs overseas, whole industries overseas. Here we go. Between 1980 and 1985, 76 former federal officials left office to become registered foreign agents. Now, this will break your heart. This is like a general switching armies in the middle of a war. They should come to serve and go home, not cash in. We got 35-year-old boys that have trouble holding a minimum wage job. They don't have any skills. All they've done is run around and, service a senior official in Washington. They're making $200,000 or $300,000 a year because they got his ear. Now, even worse, and I hope you will put your foot down and make both parties throw the cards on the table. They've got these people on leaves of absence now working on presidential campaigns. foreign lobbyists on leaves of absence working on presidential campaign. That's like having Russian spies in the middle of a presidential campaign during the Cold War, because we're in a business war now, folks. Go down the list. 8 special assistants to the President of the United States, 5 assistants to the President of the United States, 2 deputy assistants to the President of the United States, 1 President's counselor, 1 deputy White House press secretary, 1 chief of staff to the Vice President of the United States, 2 U.S. trade representatives, 6 senators, 9 members of the House of Representatives, 12 senior Senate staff members, 5 senior House staff members, 4 retired generals, a chairman and a vice chairman of the U.S. International Trade Commission. And the sickest thing of all, we had a key guy on the Trade Commission leave and go to the other side in the middle of the negotiation. He knew the plans, the strategy, the details. As far as I'm concerned, that's economic treason. If we get there, we're going to clean this mess up on day one. I don't have to tell all of you as you drive to work that we got to have oil because we make gasoline from oil, and we use oil for a lot of different things in this country. Only in America would we not have an energy policy, and we don't. And yet 48% of our oil that we use is imported. We are totally vulnerable in the event of a war. We absolutely must have an energy policy, and we need it now. Well, here's our growth, a little over 2%. Here's Japan's growth, a little over 5%. Now here are the tigers of the future. Countries that we just kind of used to think of as interesting countries to read about, like Thailand. The newly industrialized Asian countries are really, really growing. And a huge amount of manufacturing is being done there, and this is where a lot of the manufacturing gets shipped to. Well, are we investing in the future? Look at Japan, 16% of its gross domestic product in the future. Look at Germany, 8%. Look at the United States, 4%. Who does tomorrow belong to? The people who are investing in the future. Why aren't we investing in the future? As one of our friends in Japan said, in Japan we think 10 years ahead. In the United States, you think 10 minutes ahead. He meant that in a friendly way. I take it in a friendly way. I say it to you to stir you up. We are thinking 10 minutes ahead. We have got to invest in the future, and we're not. Now here's a little interesting one here. What does gasoline cost around the world? In Italy, it's $5 a gallon. France, $4.54. Japan, $3.79. England, $3.68. Germany, $3.47. You say, well, that doesn't make any sense, Ross, because gasoline costs about the same thing everywhere. Yes, but look at this line here. That's taxes. They're collecting huge amounts of taxes to build infrastructure and to invest in the future. Look at what they're collecting per gallon. In Italy, it's $3.57 a gallon. In Japan, it's $2.25. In Germany, it's $1.99. In the United States, it's 35 cents. They take that money and invest it in the future. Who's winning? Who's losing? Well, how has all this impacted the folks across the country? Here's, back to trickle-down economics, it didn't trickle. 49.6% of our income is going to the richest 20% of our population. The second richest fifth gets 21%. The middle fifth gets 14%. The second poorest fifth gets about 10%. And the poorest folks, 20%, every one of these 20% of the population, gets 4.3%. That's not fair. You know it's not fair. I know it's not fair. That's a system that won't work. Well, let's take a quick look at the changes in income for the average U.S. family. This is in 1980, the blue. The pink is in 1990. See, there's been very little change, little drops, little drops, little drops, little drops. You get over here, big gains. For the richest, 20%. Well, in the middle of all this, what's happening to the federal government? I just drew out here so you could see who's growing the most. Health is growing the most, Social Security is growing the second most, Education and Social Services is next, Science has grown a great deal, Community Development, so on and so forth. Interestingly enough, there's defense way up there. Natural Resources hasn't grown much, Commerce hasn't grown much. There's our number one problem, commerce. Agriculture hasn't grown much. On the other hand, we only used to have 25% of the people farming. Now we have 2%, but we got more people working in the Department of Agriculture. Heard a story the other day about, we walked in the Department of Agriculture, and a man was sitting at his desk crying. And he said, "What's the matter?" He said, "My farmer died." He said, "There's almost one fellow sitting up there doing paperwork for everybody out there farming." Now that's what's wrong with our government. It is poorly run and poorly managed. Now there are no villains. It's just that we send people to Washington who don't understand how to get things done, who don't understand business, and who go with a different purpose in life. Well, entitlements, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, will go through the roof by the year 2020. See, be going up toward $2 trillion a year. We only take in a little over $1 trillion a year. We've got to have a booming economy to pay for this. We don't have a booming economy now. We've already covered that. Every business person watching this show tonight is probably saying, "Well, Ross, where does the money come from and where does the money go?" Fair question. The thing I find amusing is I've talked to very senior officials in Washington who don't know where the money comes from and don't know where the money goes. So tonight, all 250 million of us can get a quick look at it. It's not that complicated. It's kind of depressing, but it's not complicated. Okay, here's where the money comes in from. Individual income taxes, we get 44% of the total revenues that come to the federal government. Social insurance, Medicare, Social Security, so on and so forth, right here. Then right down here, you have your corporate income tax, which gets you about 9%. Here you've got the excise tax, brings you $47 billion, or 3.9%. Other is $52 billion. That's where the money comes from. Now, we know we're taking in $1.1 trillion. That's the good news. The bad news is you're spending $1.5 trillion. Well, where does the money go? The money, the biggest single sum, goes to entitlements. Again, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, so on and so forth. The pink one right there. Major, major expenditure money right there. Later on in our program, we'll talk about the cost effectiveness of some of these programs. They're certainly expensive. Net interest right here is $199 billion. That's down this year because interest rates have been run down for the election. Think about that, though. If you loan money to Germany for much higher rates than you can in the United States, where do you think all these foreign investors are going? Anywhere in Europe, you can loan money to a country for a much higher rate than you can in the United States. General government expenses, $216 billion. International, $20 billion. National defense, $313 billion. That's where the money goes. $400 billion spread. That's the problem right there. $400 billion in 1 year. I find this chart very interesting. In 1960, we spent $16 billion on our public schools, and they were the envy of the world. Today, we spend $199 billion a year across the country, and we have the least effective public school system in the industrialized world. Throwing money at a problem won't necessarily fix it. You want to see a poorly run government example here. We spend $295 billion a year defending the world. The two economic superpowers spend $34 billion, $32 billion. This is beautiful. We are draining our treasury to defend the world. The other countries who are rich, the other countries who have what used to be our money, are not bearing their fair share of the defense burden. We've got to change that. They need to do their share. We spend about $100 billion a year. This is probably down a little now, but we were spending $100 billion a year defending Europe and $100 billion a year defending Asia. And we're broke, and they're rich. Think about it. Now, U.S. health care costs have gone through the roof. Now, this is interesting here. Look at that going up right there. Going up to $600 billion a year. Well, do we have the best health care in the world? No. We rank behind 15 other nations. We're 16th in life expectancy and behind 22 other nations in infant mortality. We're 23rd. How does this impact our children? With all this money, surely we don't have any children in poverty. Well, here we go. Here's the graph. Starting back in 1970, we're a little over 14%. We're now up around 21% of our children live in poverty. 1 out of every 5 children in this country lives in poverty. These are not alabaster cities that gleam undimmed by human tears. This is not a shining beacon to the rest of the world. You want to know why I'm doing this? You want to know why I'm willing to put my family through all of this? We're getting to it right now. Not a single minute of this that's pleasant. There's not a single second of this that anybody would do for fun. But this has got to be done for these little children. 20% in poverty. Well, does the rest of the world have 20% in poverty? What about our international competitors? I'm embarrassed to show you this chart. There's Sweden, 0.8%, West Germany, 2.8%, United Kingdom, 3.3%. Now, these are different times because I couldn't get current figures. The Netherlands, 4.0%, France, 4.7%, Australia, 9%, Canada, 9.3%, U.S., 21%. Now, if you can just switch channels and stop thinking about that, we're not going to be a great country. We should not leave this segment of our population in poverty. The American dream is for each generation to have a better life than the generation that went before. And so I'll close with this, folks. Here's where we are. When I was a boy, we doubled the standard of living in this country every other generation. Today, it takes 12 generations to double the standard of living of the American people. We are losing the American dream for our children. Now that completes my presentation. This has not been pleasant for you, I know. This possibly comes as a shock to you. But please, step one, we decided we'd look under the hood and figure out what we had to do. We've looked under the hood. We now know what we have to do. The next step is let's just go do it. We've got some tough challenges ahead of us. Fixing these problems won't be easy. We have to start now. Every day is precious. Waiting will make it worse. Pick the president that you believe has the ability to get the job done for you and your children. Pick a strong leader. Most importantly, choose the person who will do it, not just talk about it. Pick the person you respect and trust. He cannot do it for you. You must stick with him as a united team. Then and only then can we get the job done. Together we can pass on the American dream to our children. Can you think of anything more important than your children? Look at them tonight before you go to bed. Your hopes and dreams are all wrapped up in them. They are our future. Let's just link arms and go do it for them. It'll be tough, but it will be fun. Thank you and good night. Tonight we define the problem. In the coming days we will cover the solutions. Time limitations force me to leave some important things out tonight that you need to know. We will be running this show again, plus others, to give you more facts. Please read the book, United We Stand, to learn more about the problems and answers. Think about your children's and grandchildren's futures. Together, we can fix anything in this country. Let's go to work.
Ross Perot reportedly paid $300